1. A nation divided, a future unwritten. The year 1865 marked the end of the American Civil War, a conflict that had torn the nation apart for 4 long and bloody years. The guns had fallen silent, but the country remained deeply wounded and profoundly divided. The southern states, once proud and defiant, lay in economic and social ruin. Their cities were scarred, their farms neglected. Their entire way of life, built upon the institution of slavery, had been shattered. More than 4 million African Americans were newly freed. They stepped out of bondage into a world of uncertain promise. The central and most pressing question facing the United States was no longer about winning a war, but about winning the peace. How would the fractured Union be pieced back together? And, just as importantly, what would be the place of these millions of freedmen and freedwomen in the reborn nation? This period, known as Reconstruction, was a time of immense challenge and profound debate. It was an attempt to answer fundamental questions about national identity, federal power, human rights. In the immediate aftermath of the Civil War and the shocking assassination of President Abraham Lincoln in April 1865, the responsibility for guiding the nation through Reconstruction fell to his successor, Andrew Johnson. A Southerner from Tennessee who had remained loyal to the Union, Johnson's approach was shaped by his own background and political beliefs. He quickly implemented what became known as Presidential Reconstruction, a plan that reflected his desire for a rapid restoration of the southern states. He offered amnesty and the return of property to most former Confederates who pledged loyalty to the Union. He required the seceded states to ratify the 13th Amendment, which formally abolished slavery, but otherwise gave them a great deal of freedom to form new governments and manage their own affairs. However, the leaders who emerged were often the very same men who had led the rebellion. These newly formed state legislatures began passing a series of restrictive laws known as the Black Codes. These codes were designed to control the labor and behavior of African Americans, effectively recreating a system of servitude. They limited property ownership, restricted movement, and forced freedmen into unfair labor contracts. For many in the North, it looked as though the South was attempting to win through legislation what it had lost on the battlefield, undermining the entire purpose of the war. The passage of the Black Codes created an immediate and powerful backlash in Congress. When senators and representatives gathered in Washington, D.C. at the end of 1865, they were alarmed by the developments in the South. They saw President Johnson's plan as a failure that was allowing the old Southern order to reassert itself and deny fundamental rights to the freed people. In a dramatic move, Congress refused to seat the newly elected representatives from the Southern states. This action signaled a direct challenge to the president's authority and marked the beginning of a bitter power struggle between the executive and legislative branches of government over who would control the course of Reconstruction. This growing conflict set the stage for a more radical approach. The cause was President Johnson's mild plan, and the effect was the South's enactment of oppressive Black Codes. This, in turn, caused Congress to reject the president's authority and seek its own solution. The initial attempt at a quick and easy reunion had failed, revealing the deep-seated resistance to change within the South and the unwillingness of many in the North to accept a superficial peace. The easy path had proven to be a dead end, forcing Congress to consider a more forceful and comprehensive strategy to secure the rights of freed people and truly remake the American Republic. It was a struggle between a desire for swift restoration and a demand for a thorough transformation. The central conflict was not just about policy, it was about the very soul of the country. As the conflict with President Johnson intensified, a powerful faction within the Republican Party gained prominence and began to drive the legislative agenda. These were the Radical Republicans, a group of congressmen and senators who held a firm and uncompromising belief in civil rights and racial equality. Leaders like Thaddeus Stevens in the House of Representatives and Charles Sumner in the Senate were not content with merely ending slavery. They were abolitionists at heart, who argued that the federal government had a moral and constitutional duty to protect the rights of African Americans and ensure they could participate fully as citizens in the nation's political and economic life. With Congress now in command, The radical Republicans implemented their own plan for rebuilding the South, a plan far more sweeping than anything President Johnson had envisioned. This new phase, often called radical or congressional Reconstruction, was codified in a series of laws passed in 1867 known as the Reconstruction Acts. These acts effectively wiped away the state governments that had been formed under Johnson's plan. They divided the 10 former Confederate states that had not yet been readmitted into 5 military districts, each to be governed by a Union general. The presence of the U.S. Army was meant to ensure order, protect the rights of freed people, and oversee a new, federally mandated political process. The conditions for rejoining the Union under this new plan were stringent and revolutionary. Each Southern state was required to draft a new state constitution at a convention where delegates were elected by all adult men, including African Americans. These new constitutions had to guarantee voting rights for black men. Furthermore, the states were required to ratify the newly proposed 14th Amendment, which established national citizenship and promised equal protection of the laws. Only after meeting these requirements could a state's representatives be readmitted to Congress, officially ending its period of federal oversight and military rule. This was a top-down effort to remake Southern society from its very foundations. This radical plan brought about a stunning political transformation in the South. For the first time in American history, African American men were able to participate in the political process on a large scale. They registered to vote in massive numbers, eager to exercise their newfound rights as citizens. They served as delegates to the state constitutional conventions and helped to write some of the most progressive constitutions the South had ever seen. These new documents often established public school systems, for the first time created more equitable tax systems, and outlawed racial discrimination in public life. This was a brief but remarkable moment of interracial democracy. As a result of this new political landscape, African Americans were elected to public office at every level of government. Black men served in state legislatures as sheriffs and as local officials across the South. More than a dozen served in the U.S. House of Representatives: Hiram Revels, Blanche K. Bruce. These new Republican-led governments, a coalition of African Americans, white Southerners who supported Reconstruction, often derided as scalawags, and Northerners who had moved south, carpetbaggers, began ambitious programs of public works, building roads, bridges, schools to help rebuild the devastated region. For a short time, the radical Republican vision of a new South was becoming a reality. The radical Republicans understood that laws alone were not enough to secure the profound changes they sought. Laws could be repealed by a future Congress, but amendments to the Constitution would provide a permanent foundation for the rights of all citizens. Therefore, the centerpiece of their program was a series of constitutional amendments to embed liberty and equality into the nation's charter. This effort was nothing less than a second American Revolution. It redefined the relationship between the federal government and the states and the meaning of American citizenship. The first, the 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, abolished slavery. The most significant was the 14th Amendment, passed 1866, ratified 1868. It had several key provisions. First, a national definition of citizenship. All persons born or naturalized in the United States were citizens. This overturned the Dred Scott decision of 1857, which had denied African Americans citizenship. Second, it prohibited states from abridging privileges or immunities of citizens. It barred states from depriving any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Crucially, it guaranteed equal protection of the laws, a cornerstone for future civil rights. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, was direct. It declared the right to vote shall not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The revolutionary changes imposed by radical Reconstruction were met with fierce and violent opposition from a large segment of the white Southern population. Many former Confederates and others who had long dominated Southern society were unwilling to accept a new order based on political and social equality for African Americans. They viewed the Republican-led governments as illegitimate, imposed upon them by a conquering power and propped up by federal troops. They resented the political influence of African Americans. They resented the political influence of Northerners. They resented the political influence of their local white allies. This deep-seated resistance manifested itself in a campaign of intimidation, violence, and terror designed to overthrow the new governments and restore white supremacy. The most notorious of these was the Ku Klux Klan, which emerged in Tennessee in 1866 and quickly spread across the South. Klansmen conducted a campaign of terror, primarily at night. Their targets were African American leaders, voters, anyone who supported the Republican Party. They also attacked white teachers in schools for freedmen and officials of the Freedmen's Bureau. Their methods were brutal. They burned schools, burned churches, issued threats, whipped and beat their victims, committed murder. The Klan's goal was to use fear to destroy the Republican Party in the South and to prevent African Americans from voting and from holding office. Under the leadership of President Ulysses S. Grant, Congress passed the Enforcement Acts in 1870 and 1871. While the federal government made efforts to combat Southern terrorism, the political will in the North to continue the demanding and costly project of Reconstruction began to weaken. By the early 1870s, many Northerners were growing weary of the seemingly endless conflict in the South. The constant need to send troops, fund federal agencies, and manage political crises was draining. In 1873, the country was plunged into a severe economic depression known as the Panic of 1873. Banks failed, businesses closed, and unemployment soared across the nation. Northerners became more concerned with their own financial survival than with the political rights of African Americans in the distant South. Calls for federal investment in the South were replaced by demands for fiscal conservatism and government retrenchment. Political scandals within the Grant administration also eroded public confidence in the federal government and the Republican Party. In the midterm elections of 1874, the Democratic Party won control of the House of Representatives for the first time since before the Civil War. The old guard of radical Republicans had passed away, and a new generation of Republican leaders was often less committed to the cause of racial equality. The Northern will to continue the fight was fading fast. The final nail in the coffin of Reconstruction came with the contentious presidential election of 1876. The race pitted the Republican candidate Rutherford B. Hayes against the Democrat Samuel J. Tilden. Tilden had won the popular vote and appeared poised to win the Electoral College, but the results in 3 southern states were disputed: Florida, Louisiana, South Carolina. These were the last southern states with Republican governments protected by federal troops. Democrats claimed victory through widespread voter intimidation and fraud. Republicans insisted their candidate had won the legitimate votes. The nation was thrown into a constitutional crisis. Conflicting electoral returns arrived in Washington, no clear winner. For months, the country risked having no president. Some feared renewed armed conflict. Leaders from both parties entered secret negotiations. The result was an informal, unwritten deal known as the Compromise of 1877. Democratic leaders agreed to accept Rutherford B. Hayes as president. It was a political bargain to avert a national showdown. The Republican administration agreed to withdraw all remaining federal troops from the South. With the end of Reconstruction in 1877, the gains made by African Americans were systematically dismantled. The Redeemer governments in the South moved to solidify white supremacy and erase the interracial democracy of the previous decade. Through a combination of poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and outright intimidation, Southern states effectively disenfranchised black voters, stripping them of the political power they had gained under the 15th Amendment. This political exclusion was accompanied by the rise of a rigid system of racial segregation known as Jim Crow, which enforced separation and inequality in every aspect of public life. The promise of equality was broken, and for nearly a century, African Americans in the South lived under a system of state-sanctioned discrimination and economic exploitation. However, the long-term legacy of Reconstruction is far more complex and significant. The era was not a total failure because it produced the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment. These constitutional changes, born from the vision of the radical Republicans, remained part of the nation's fundamental law. For decades they lay dormant, unenforced, and ignored, but they were never erased. They served as a sleeping giant, a powerful legal foundation waiting to be reawakened. They enshrined the principles of national citizenship, equal protection, and voting rights into the Constitution, providing the essential tools for future generations of activists. In the 20th century, the civil rights movement would reclaim the legacy of Reconstruction. Lawyers like Thurgood Marshall and leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. would build their legal and moral arguments on the foundation of the 14th and 15th Amendments. The legal challenges that dismantled segregation and the legislative victories like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were, in many ways, a second Reconstruction, a fulfillment of the promises made a century earlier. The story of the radical Republicans and their struggle is a powerful reminder that while progress can be delayed and defeated, the ideals of liberty and equality, once enshrined in law, can endure and inspire future struggles for justice. Soft, the path the nation chose would echo for more than a century, defining the limits and possibilities of American democracy.